We can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world. Go make a difference. We can make a difference. Go make a difference in the world.
We can indeed. Someone who knows all about that, especially in the pro-life movement, our good friend Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life, an author and international speaker. He's going to be among the keynotes at the Walk for Life West Coast. We'll also be seeing him in Washington, as we always do. There's going to be a special event with deacons. If there's any deacons out there who would like to get involved with Deacons for Life, Deacon Dom is very involved in that, as is Father Frank Pavone, helping to lead that ministry as well. Gosh, Father, so much to talk about. First of all, I understand we're on a number of different platforms this morning, in addition to Ave Maria Radio, all of our affiliates that listen to this hour of the show, as well as all those listening online. But you have a number of other streaming activities going on currently, correct?
We sure do, and we welcome all our friends on all those platforms, things like Periscope and Vimeo, and we even have a Roku channel and numerous YouTube accounts, and we're out on dozens of platforms.
Well, hello to all those following, and aren't you just all that in a bag of technological chips, Father Frank? I'll tell you. You just do it all, and that's awesome because we have to use these technologies to make a difference. Okay, boy, I don't know where to begin. There's a number of major pro-life stories. First of all, a big story out of Washington regarding congressional lawmakers, congressional leaders who are standing up for life. More than 200 members of Congress are asking the U.S. Supreme Court to take another look at Roe v. Wade. So tell us about this.
Well, we were involved on this from the inside. We worked with various members of Congress, encouraging them to sign on to this brief. And this is not unprecedented in the sense that in other cases of the Supreme Court that deal with issues like this, Congress, the pro-life members of Congress have weighed in. In fact, other groups weigh in as well. Priests for Life, for example, on behalf of Silent No More and Rachel's Vineyard, we submitted a brief as well in this upcoming case out of Louisiana. So the members of Congress signed on, as you say, 207 of them. Now, the pro-abortion members of Congress issued a brief as well, but there were not as many of them, interestingly, though, right? Because even though they have the majority in the House anyway, and they're by a slim margin in minority in the Senate, nevertheless, they could not muster the same numbers, which is not surprising. But this got a lot of attention yesterday because in a press release in which I was also quoted together with some other pro-life leaders, the office of the House Minority Whip, Representative Steve Scalise from Louisiana, announced this brief. That now for those that are not familiar, a friend of the court brief, or in Latin, amicus curiae, a friend of the court, is a document that somebody who is not one of the petitioners or respondents in the case itself can nevertheless submit to the court. And there are certain protocols and deadlines, of course, and requirements. But you can submit a document to the court giving some information that might be useful for the justices in deciding the case, giving some perspective, accenting or reinforcing one or another of the arguments. And the friend of the court brief can be either on behalf of the appellees or the appellants, as it's called. And in this case, the pro-abortion side is the one knocking on the door of the Supreme Court, saying, "Hey, we object because the lower federal court, the Court of Appeals, upheld Louisiana's pro-life law, which, among other things, says that an abortionist has to have hospital-admitting privileges in a nearby hospital if he's going to practice abortion." So this is exciting. Now, the thing about Roe v. Wade, here, Teresa, here's what's going on. As we saw with the nomination and confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, as we saw with the election of Donald Trump himself, the other side, the pro-abortion side, we have to understand they exaggerate how easy and close at hand is the overturn of Roe v. Wade. They exaggerate. Now, we are moving in that direction, and I believe that we will reverse Roe v. Wade. But they exaggerate it in order to gin up their base. and in order to paint people like the president, the Congress, the GOP itself, in this case the state of Louisiana, they try to paint all of us as the bad guy. Oh, look, we're going to take away women's reproductive rights tomorrow. It is not likely that this particular Supreme Court case is going to reverse Roe v. Wade, and that's not the expectation. The expectation is that the court can take yet another step in the right direction to bring some more sanity into our abortion policy. And in this case, the question is this: if a state takes a step to protect the health of women in that state from unscrupulous, unregulated abortion clinics, by simply saying, hey, this doctor should have hospital admitting privileges so that there can be some kind of continuity. If a medical emergency arises in the clinic, she gets brought to the emergency room. If it's the same doctor that can meet her at the emergency room and take things from there, you might have an easier transition there. The policies right now are insane. Abortion is so unregulated, and there are so many problems. But the question before the court, the constitutional issue, is if a state puts a requirement like this in place, can the other side just come along and say, well, because it's going to make it harder for someone to get an abortion, maybe because those doctors don't qualify for hospital admitting privileges, is the fact that it makes it harder to get an abortion therefore a reason for the court to strike down the law? That's what's at the crux here. Because sometimes the court has said yes, sometimes the court has said no. Just a few years ago, the similar law out of Texas was struck down because the court was saying, oh, well, it'll mean that too many abortion clinics will close. Well, yeah, but maybe there's a good reason for them to close if the doctor's not qualified.
See, this is the thing, though, Father. This is what we have to do when we talk about these stories, because when you see what they do in the secular media, for example, this morning, I ran a story from a news service, basically, which is very liberal. It's a secular service. It's very cheap also. We're trying to save money, but it causes us to rewrite a lot because the things are so poorly written and so pro-leftist. But, for example, the story that they did, the reporter Brian Shook did on more than 200 members of Congress want the U.S. Supreme Court to take another look at Roe v. Wade. It was a very generic story, just saying that this is based on this Louisiana law, yada, yada, yada. They didn't even go into the detail on the Louisiana law. So what I did after that story was add several paragraphs from a Catholic news agency report saying Louisiana's law, the Unsafe Abortion Protection Act, was sponsored by State Rep. Katrina Jackson, signed by then-Governor Bobby Jindal. The act requiring abortion clinics where surgical abortions are performed to have the same safety standards as those of other ambulatory surgical centers. Adding that information is very important because it highlights the problems with abortion in the first place. As you said, the insanity that goes on. How is it that a place that does surgery doesn't have the same safety standards as other ambulatory surgical centers?
And here's something, that's right, and here's something else we should point out. There's a lot of ignorance. I was going on my Twitter last night, and in fact, I hope everyone's following me at FR Frank Pavone on Twitter and Instagram for that matter. But on Twitter, Roe v. Wade was trending last night, okay? So it was a big topic of discussion because of this press release that we had signed on to and the Congress issued about this friend of the court brief. It's amazing how people, they'll holler, on the other side, on the pro-abortion side, they'll holler about Roe v. Wade. Oh, we have to preserve it, we have to protect it, we have to codify it, all this and that. And I don't think most of them have even ever read it. But what you don't ever hear them admitting is Roe v. Wade itself did not make abortion an absolute right. As a matter of fact, the decision made it very clear that there have to be medical regulations, that there has to be, there is an interest of the state, there's an interest of the state in protecting the health of women. All the decisions, the court has ruled dozens of times on abortion, the Supreme Court. We look at all the federal courts, hundreds and hundreds of times has ruled on abortion since Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. And in so many of these decisions, first of all, the fact that there are so many decisions, and sometimes they're going one way and sometimes another way, shows that there is no clear constitutional basis for Roe v. Wade in the first place. What it has also done is it shows that this is the only medical procedure that people are claiming is a constitutional right in and of itself, and the only medical procedure for which the court has essentially set itself up as a medical review board for the nation. And this puts the court, and a lot of the justices have complained about this, puts the court in an impossible situation, having to be a referee every time a state wants to act on interests that the court itself has already identified as legitimate. And you know, if a court wants to, if the people in Louisiana and their legislators deem it necessary to protect the health of the people in their state by passing this particular law, why in the world should the Supreme Court be involved in that in the first place? That's the but Roe v. Wade permits reasonable regulations on abortion,
So how did it get so off track then? How did we get to the point we always say we went right from the back alleys to Main Street?
Yes, because it's ideology driving the court. It's judicial activism. It's right from the beginning here when it comes to abortion and Roe v. Wade. We have a decision that has been is right from the beginning absolutely devoid of any constitutional basis. People, it's hard for people to understand this. They say, well, what do you mean it has no constitutional basis? It's a Supreme Court decision, right? I mean, people find this hard to even process. But the fact of the matter is that even pro-choice legal experts from the beginning have identified that. Even Justice Ginsburg has criticized not the conclusion of Roe, but the reasoning in it. It's devoid of constitutional reasoning. And when you start off on that step, you're going to have what's going to happen is that ideologically driven courts are going to want to hold on to the conclusion, but they're going to be searching for the rationale. And that's what when you read all the Supreme Court decisions on abortion, which I encourage people to do, by the way. This is no mystery. They're right there online, and the documents aren't that long. Read all the court's decisions on abortion, and you're going to see, this swaying back and forth. Oh, what's the reason? What's privacy? No, it's liberty. No, it's equal protection. No, here's the basis. No, there's the basis. Well, there's an undue burden. That's the standard. No, that's not actually the standard. Well, this is what the standard means. And they put these standards in place, like undue burden. That's in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. But they don't define it. I remember having dinner one time with Justice Clarence Thomas. He was giving a talk to a small group of people. And he said, you have to understand this. When you see these terms being thrown about like substantive due process or undue burden, there's all these court terms in this abortion system. He says, what do they mean? He says, we don't know what they mean. He says they have whatever meaning the judges want to give them. He says that's the problem here. He says you got to go back to the Constitution itself. And that's the biggest difference in the type of judges that President Trump is putting in place and the type of judges that the Democrats put in place. The Democrats, they're engaged in an exercise of creative writing. They're writing fiction when they write these court decisions. They're putting things in there that the Constitution doesn't say. They're taking things out that it does say. They're putting their own interpretation, doing things that the legislative branch is supposed to be doing instead of the courts. And Justice Thomas was very, very, as he always is, very clear and very direct. He says, we're making this stuff up. We don't even know what it means. So we have to, that's why hopefully this case out of Louisiana will start. It's the first abortion case now that you've got both Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, both put there by President Trump, weighing in on the merits of an abortion-related case. This is going to be very interesting to see.
This is another effort, though, Father, another opportunity for an educational effort to let people know what's really going on with Roe v. Wade and what's been happening for the last 40-plus years, right?
And the timing is perfect because now, we're in, if you want to call it this, it's sort of like Roe v. Wade season. This is in a very appropriate time to read up on it. I would recommend a book, for those that really want to delve into this and don't mind reading, a lot about legal stuff. Clark Forsyth, our friend over at Americans United for Life, he's senior counsel over there. He's one of the top experts in the nation about abortion and how the courts have dealt with abortion. He's written a book called Abuse of Discretion. It came out some years ago. Nice thick book, but he talks about how Roe v. Wade came about and the legal decision, the legal maneuverings in it. Abuse of Discretion. Look it up. It's a great book to read during this month as we approach the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And also, Teresa, I'm involved together with Alveda King on our team with helping the folks that are putting together this movie, Roe v. Wade. They've had to do a lot of work on it. It's gotten off to a bumpy start because there's a lot of editing that had to be done. But Roe v. Wade is a movie that hopefully is going to be coming out in the early spring of this year that also attempts to educate the public on how this decision actually came about and, how it was so ideologically driven rather than constitutionally driven.
Yeah, I think all of this nonsense that we're seeing in the culture and the attacks on conservatives all the way from the White House on down, I think the bottom line is abortion. I'm sorry. I think it all goes back to that. They're losing their minds over this because they realize that abortion is being chipped away at, which is so important. Father, wish we had more time. And next week we have to really start talking about the March for Life, encourage people to go because there's so much going on. I know you're involved in many of the activities, and we look forward to seeing you there. And we will talk next week. Father Frank Pavone, Happy New Year. And again, Father Frank can be found all over the Internet and on the website, on the radio as well. And go to priestforlife.org for one of the best resource pages on the pro-life issues ever. We'll be right back.